Spider-Man No Way Home is easily one of the most hyped movies of this year. It promises a lot of action through Peter's public doxing, the expansion of the multiverse, and the crossover straight out of a Power Rangers episode. As a film student, I love digging into the reasons behind creative choices. And as I thought more and more about what this trailer showed, I realized that this movie is the amalgamation of everything going on behind the scenes for years. Flashback to about a decade ago. After Spider-Man 3, Sam Raimi would return for Spider-Man 4. Interviews and storyboard art revealed the villain as the Vulture. As Sony kept pushing Raimi to settle with a script, the movie eventually fell apart. With a fresh slate, Sony had the option of joining the MCU. Marvel especially seemed keen on the idea. Early plans for the Incredible Hulk and Avengers both had Spider-Man cameos. The latter even got a bit closer with the near inclusion of Oscorp Tower. But all of these plans were sadly scrapped, as Sony worked on an independent reboot, The Amazing Spider-Man. But it seems that they realized their mistake pretty early on. When The Amazing Spider-Man was released, the Avengers became a box office sensation. Given Spider-Man's expansive character roster, Sony could make their own MCU without sharing any rights. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 eventually teased these ideas with tons of Easter eggs and promotions. Thanks to the Sony hack, which would be a great time for me to plug in a NordVPN sponsorship, if I had one, people got to see how ballistic Sony was going with all sorts of ideas. They wanted to resurrect Gwen for future movies as either Spider-Gwen or Carnage. The long-delayed Venom movie would share the same universe, though that eventually turned into its own thing. An Aunt May spy movie was considered for some reason. And finally, their answer to the Avengers, the Sinister Six. The movie would unite Spider-Man with his classic foes to defeat a greater evil. Some of the planned leads included the Green Goblin, Doc-Ock, Sandman, the Vulture, the Scorpion, and Mysterio. Now, think about this. The Vulture and Mysterio were the villains of the previous MCU Spidey films. The Scorpion also appears in Homecoming, though without his suit. The idea of even using the Vulture was brought back from Spider-Man 4. Jamie Foxx has confirmed his return as Electro, and Yellow Lightning attacks Spider-Man in the trailer. In the same shot, some sand floats by. Sandman could disintegrate his body into giant waves in the Raimi trilogy. And speaking of which, the Green Goblin's bomb for those movies rolls into another shot, with the trailer ending on Alfred Molina's Doc-Ock. With all of these hints and prior knowledge, it seems pretty obvious Sony wanted to fit in their scrapped movie in another way. Before you talk about how this is all a giant coincidence, idea blending happens all the time in production. There's even an example within the MCU itself. The idea for the Iron Spider suit was around since Civil War. It eventually got cut, but it appeared in other movies. On another note, one of the treatments for Sinister Six had Spider-Man wearing the black suit. While not the symbiote, Spider-Man will still wear a new black suit in No Way Home. Now, how can we be sure this was Sony's doing? For that, we have to go back to 2019. When renovating Spider-Man's MCU contract, the deal initially fell through. As many worried Sony would simply yank Spider-Man back to themselves, others began to wonder how the dispute could be resolved. Film channel Midnight's Edge suggested that the key was an irrefutable offer. The way the deal works is that Sony gets the box office profits. Meanwhile, Kevin Feige oversees the creative aspects like with the rest of the MCU. So the offer Marvel most likely put up is giving Sony more creative input. And they probably thought, sure, we'll stay. We just want you to use some of our ideas. Alfred Molina also confirmed that he would be playing the same Doc-Ock from Spider-Man 2, despite his death in the movie. The same goes for Jamie Foxx in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. But why would Sony choose previous actors rather than recasting like Tom Holland? Of course, they could sell tickets on nostalgia alone, but the real kicker is the idea of the multiverse. Marvel has been expanding on this with Loki, WandaVision, and eventually Doctor Strange 2. By tying their movies in, Sony can retcon them as being part of the MCU. Not to mention that movies like Venom and Morbius will technically be part of the MCU, even if not in the main continuity. Sony could just brag about this with their advertising, making people think that they need to see their movies to understand the MCU's greater story. This results in everyone winning in the end. Sony borrows the MCU's credibility, Marvel continues using Spider-Man, and audiences enjoyed the meshing of old and new elements without it feeling out of place. And if Sony's movies could get retconned into the MCU, technically any Marvel movie can get retconned into the MCU's larger multiverse. Overall, No Way Home's setup has a fascinating history behind it. Of course, my recount is a condensed version of Spider-Man's film history and cancelled projects, but I find it amazing how some abandoned ideas found new life in this movie. I hope you could understand the deeper meaning behind No Way Home's creative decisions, because to me, those little whys and hows are what make media production so cool. EO!